Thank you, and I thank the Journalists and Writers Foundation for choosing this topic, because freedom of speech and freedom of information is something we take for granted in democratic societies, but we shouldn't, and you will find out why, I hope. I will begin my speech by giving you two definitions of the freedom of the press, not because I think you don't know what press freedom is, but because I want to show you the evolution of the definition through the decades. The first definition is by George Orwell, who lived in the first half of the 20th century. According to him, freedom of the press means the freedom to criticize and oppose. As simple as that. But definitions of the 21st century describe press freedom as the ability of journalists to select, produce, and disseminate news independent of political, economic, legal, and social interference, and in the absence of threats to their physical and mental safety. So, as you can see, the definition of press freedom had to be broadened in this century in order to encompass the more complex threats that journalists face today. This year, World Press Freedom Index, which evaluates 180 countries, found that unfortunately the environment for journalism is bad in 7 out of 10 countries in the world, and satisfactory in only 3 out of 10 countries. The entire American continent, including the United States, no longer has any country where press freedom is deemed good. In the Asia Pacific, there are some of the worst countries regarding freedom. In Africa, nearly half of the countries are problematic. And last in the regional ranking is the Middle East and North Africa, which continue to be the world's most dangerous region for journalists. Europe continues to be the best continent to work as a journalist, but even there, the situation is problematic. Even in Germany, which has a good ranking in the Press Freedom Index, Germany is number 21 out of 180 countries, a record number of cases of violence against journalists were recorded last year. So, apart from the traditional threats that curtail press freedom, murder and attacks against journalists, there are many more modern threats and subtler threats, and this is the tricky part, that might not harm journalists physically, but they do harm press freedom. For example, one easy example is that in 2 out of 3 countries, politicians are involved in massive disinformation or propaganda campaigns, which result in blurring the difference between true and false. And this is made possible thanks to new technology. But apart from new technology, those who want to mess with press freedom have many tools in their disposal right now. I would like to introduce you to just 2 of them. One is media capture. I don't know if you are familiar with the term, but media capture describes the way politicians and businessmen collaborate in order to control the media. Instead of a government to directly control or close down a newspaper or a TV station because they are too critical of its policies, it colludes with friendly businessmen who buy the newspaper or the website or the TV station. And under the new owner, the medium stops being critical of the government, and the journalists who don't comply are simply fired. Media capture is one of the gravest and most intractable new threats to press freedom around the world. In country after country, collusion between governments and wealthy media owners has become the preferred method of control over the media. In countries such as Hungary, Turkey, and Russia, media capture is already the dominant form of media ownership. The second new tool to curtail press freedom I would like to mention to you is SLAPS. It's an acronym which means Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation, or more simply, intimidation lawsuits. These are lawsuits against journalists or human rights defenders with the purpose to censor, intimidate, and silence them by burdening them with legal costs. In a typical SLAP case, the plaintiff does not even care to win the lawsuit, because the goal is not to win, but to exhaust the journalist financially and emotionally with mounting legal costs, so that the journalists themselves decide to stop being critical. SLAPs are a very real threat to press freedom, even in places where journalists are generally respected, such as in Western Europe. The people who want to control and annoying journalists are mostly politicians and public servants. They use strategic lawsuits, often based on over-strict libel laws or vague privacy rules, and more often than not, they succeed to silence their targets. But I would like to end on a positive note. In an effort to stop such misuse of the legal system, the European Commission, which, by the way, in a very superficial count, they found hundreds of SLAPS cases in the last couple of years. So the European Commission, and they're sure there are many more that couldn't be counted. So the European Commission drafted an anti-SLAP directive that will be adopted hopefully next year. And in the United States, in more than 30 American states, Canada and Australia have already anti-SLAP laws in place.